Well, there is this one thing that creates nations, this one thing that we need to focus on, although they don't teach it in political theory in university. So if it's not the freely choosing individual that creates nations, and if not genetics, then what creates nations? Well, there is this one thing that creates nations, this one thing that we need to focus on, although they don't teach it in political theory in university. All right, and that is the ties of mutual loyalty that human beings create, the bonds of mutual loyalty that are what allow us to sacrifice for one another, to serve one another, to serve together, to serve causes greater than ourselves, and even to sacrifice our lives. It's these bonds of mutual loyalty. And a nation is, as was said, a nation is that kind of love. It is these bonds of mutual loyalty. Now, if we're going to talk about a politics that is focused not on the individual and not on race, but on the nation, right? And that's what we're doing here. That is what we're doing here. We're creating a space in which the individual will continue to be very important and race will continue to have some kind of relevance. But the central question in politics is going to return to be, as it used to be a generation ago, is going to return to be the idea of the nation. As Rusty said, this is the way that the Bible thinks about politics, is in terms of nations. If we're going to return to the idea of a nation, we need to return, in fact, to three principles. First, national independence. Second, national cohesion. And third, national traditions. National independence is the principle that says the world is governed best when the world is divided up among many different nations. They have borders they're divided by borders, and each one has within its borders its own laws, its own traditions, its own way of doing things, and it leaves the others alone. Now, that's not a utopia. We're not going to be able to implement tomorrow. It's not a blueprint, it's a hope. But it can also be a guiding principle for us to orient ourselves, to understand what our politics is about. If every nation has its own way of doing things, its own traditions and its own laws, so our job is not to be the world's policeman. Our job is not to teach the Afghanis how to run their country. If they want to come and visit our country and learn from us, then of course we can be a light unto the nations. Come learn from us. That's the ancient biblical vision of Israel, right? God gives Israel the Torah, and the Torah is supposed to be for all the nations of the world. But God then gives Israel borders. He doesn't say, go out and conquer all the nations of the world. He says, you stay behind your borders, and when they're ready, they'll come. Right? That's the ideal of national independence, that our people we want to determine our fate. We want others to leave us alone, and we'll leave them alone. Not because we don't care, but because that's the best way to care. Let us develop our experiment. Let us develop our ways. If we are right that our ways are the best, others will imitate us. And if we fail and if we're wrong, let us fail as a free people, and then we'll imitate others in order to fix things. That's the principle of national independence. Second principle of national cohesion. Now, I know Chris mentioned that earlier that there's some interpretations of this word that are a little bit scary. I'm using this word the way that it's used by the philosophers John Stuart Mill and Henry Sidgwick. All right, you can wave these names around with liberals. I'm sure that they're at the farthest possible right of academia today, John Stuart Mill, but you can still use them. They're still permissible for at least another few more years. And when Mill talks about cohesion, he's talking about this mutual loyalty that we talked about before. He's observing an empirical fact. Nations come together and feel unity. They feel unity and mutual loyalty and an ability to rise up against challenges. They feel that. It's real. It allows them to do incredible things, like, for example, having a democracy. Only a cohesive country can have a democracy. Why? Because if the country isn't strongly mutually loyal, if it's not strongly cohesive, then when one side wins the election, then the other side will refuse to hand power to them. They'll have a resistance. They'll fight them. They'll say they're illegitimate. They'll say, well, we didn't mean that when we said, democracy, right? We meant more people like us would take over. That's democracy. If you don't have cohesion, you will not have democracy, because no one's going to hand power to anybody else. Right? So clocking, paying attention to what causes cohesion, what brings it about, and where is it fraying. And I have to tell you that in my life, I've never seen the cohesion of America as frayed as it is today. So you can't tell me cohesion isn't a real thing. Because if fraying is a real thing, then fraying is the opposite of cohesion. It's America falling apart. If it goes far enough, then there won't be changes of power democratically anymore. If it goes far enough, God forbid, then there'll be civil war. So cohesion is the most important thing to be thinking about right now. And so when we come to look at a policy like immigration, right? I'm not that interested. I mean, I understand that there are economic arguments, and they're good, interesting economic arguments about who should be, how many new immigrants there should be. But honestly, it doesn't make a darn bit of difference what the economic arguments are if the country is fraying so badly, if the cohesion is so shot that adding more immigrants is going to literally tear the country to pieces. So stop. Have some common sense. First things first. You can't give away your national independence, and you can't give away your national cohesion. You have to care for those things. You don't care for those things, then you won't have any rights, and you won't have any freedoms, and you won't have anything that's good for you, and you also won't have economic success.